The agenda, this talk is split into 4 sections. So early dialogue, so how to establish some communications with local businesses, and to create that sense of buy-in, and then also to get the contractor to establish your requirements, so that the contractor, when he comes on board, actually takes those on board and helps to deliver them, because ultimately at the end of the day he is going to be quite often the face of the project that people will see on a day-to-day basis. Then we'll touch on producing standards and looking at some of the standards that are out there and building a delivery framework, so that we can help define the processes, procedures, so that you've got a framework to work within, or you can define that framework. And then the last bit is, there is always the reality of delivery, how to solve some of the problems that you're going to encounter on a day-to-day basis. So quite happy to take questions as we go along, quite happy to wait until the end, so that you can save all those questions up if you've got lots of them, or we can answer them as we go forwards. So as I said, my background is planning, scheduling. I've worked for contractors. I've worked on delivery of projects. I've worked on different types of projects to actually look at how to deliver them. At the moment, I also lead a team of planners and schedulers that provide input to design teams and clients on various delivery methods, the construction logistics. Normally involved at the moment at early stage, and so concept feasibility stages, but as I say, from when I work with contractors through to delivery, commissioning and handover. One of the things I helped to produce was the Chartered Institute of Buildings Planning Protocol, which is how to build schedules so that they were consistent, because one of the things that we find is that people have different approaches, and what we're trying to do is just get consistency and ensure that people deliver them in the same way, and that you can use them as a tool, and they're not just a picture that somebody produces and never goes back to them again. So if we go on to the next slide. So the impacts, just went through, looked at headlines. We've all seen these sorts of headlines taken from local newspapers, how whatever construction project you want to do, there are problems, they make the news. The news is normally going to be where it's gone wrong, where it's gone badly, how it's caused traffic chaos, or how it's disrupted people. Now, as we all know, construction is going to be a disruptive process. What we need to do is manage that and make sure that the impacts are reduced as much as we possibly can. So we're trying to, so one of the things we want to try and do is avoid these sorts of headlines on all of your projects, so that they are delivered smoothly, they're delivered without as much chaos or impact as possible. So if we go on, so the general impacts that are going to be found or felt by local residents, businesses, communities. Construction noise is always noise and vibration is always one that is top of the list. Construction is a noisy activity. There is always drilling, there is always cutting. People always complain of vibration to property. They always, during demolition operations, they're noisy and dusty, which brings us into air quality, air pollution, dust, the waste that gets produced quite often can be smelly. People will burn things even though they're not supposed to. So All of those need to be mitigated. Wider environmental issues that get felt, things like we've touched on air quality, noise, light, from sites, light pollution, security cameras, security lights at night. How do we deal with the waste, pollution runoff? So we suddenly start doing something, drains are blocked. You now get runoff of diesel fuel or materials that you didn't expect, and that can cause flooding. So where we've disrupted the infrastructure or there isn't any drainage infrastructure in place, flooding is something that can occur. You've got, with construction, you've got traffic. You've normally got an increase in the construction traffic. You've often got road closures that get associated with it. You've often got, diversions that put in place. Diversions that locally to me, there are a number of diversions that are in place, and that's causing quite a lot of congestion on the local road network. You've got congestion generally at certain times of the day, so the morning school run, the afternoon school run, peak commuting times. With the increased traffic, there may be accidents. There are also the unforeseen accidents where people are merrily digging a hole and they come across utilities and services which they didn't expect. Those get cut, damaged, and you need some sort of plan to rectify that. There's the general fire prevention and control. So being able to have plans in place so that derelict buildings or partial demolitions don't cause problems. There was a recently in Canterbury, there was a derelict building. It was the old Debenhams building that caught fire. That shut down half the town. We've also got extreme weather, and that is becoming more and more of a problem, where you've got temporary conditions and you then have storms or heavy rain, and that's becoming more common. Emergency response. How do you respond to these incidences, and is there a process in place? And normally these responses occur outside of normal working hours. So how is that going to be managed? And then it's beyond that, where you've got repairs. What repairs do you need to put in place? How is this covered by insurance? So if properties are damaged or you need to board something up, have you got those people ready to come along and do that? So the other big one, security, just generally managing security. Construction sites, people like to visit them. They like to steal things from them. And so if they are not properly secured, it's how do you maintain that security? What are you doing to maintain that security? On some jobs I've seen where it wasn't so much the stealing from jobs, it was the illegal dumping of waste on the site at weekends because there was nobody around. So the contractor turned up on a Monday morning and found tons of material dumped on his site. Working hours, you'll often have a core working hours, 8 till 6 or 8 till 5, whatever those core working hours. But inevitably there will be works taking place outside of those core hours for abnormal construction activities or deliveries. What do you need to do? There are often operations that once you start them, you can't easily stop them. So you need to complete the operation. And that means that you might end up with a 24-hour working period. And so therefore, you know, how do you manage that? Have you identified that? How does that impact the local residents? One thing that's often overlooked is the workforce. On larger sites, you are going to end up with a temporary workforce coming into the local community. And they need accommodation, they need welfare facilities. Are there opportunities for local employment? And it's dealing with that welfare and dealing with that workforce. If you deal with an HS2, it could be thousands. It could also just be hundreds of people. And then there are finally the ecological impacts of construction, where you've impacted drainage, people taking down trees. These become quite emotive subjects, which local residents don't want to see changed or are looking to protect. And so therefore you need to be able to understand what the impacts are likely to be and how you're going to deal with them. So if we go on to the next slide. So the next slide is about in my experience, it's about early dialogue. Start having the dialogue early with local residents, local community, local businesses, giving them a voice so that you can understand their concerns. Quite often, the first response will always be no, but you need to be able to explain the benefits of the scheme, and you need to be able to give local residents an opportunity to express their views. So collecting their views, how are their views going to be collected? How are you going to show that their views are being respected and being taken seriously? Providing responses and feedback. There is nothing more annoying than when you respond to a questionnaire, or you've got your views collected and you hear nothing back. But you need to define a set of rules of what you can and can't and what you will and won't be able to do. So if you don't define those rules, you can't have that dialogue. You need to have that continual ongoing dialogue. You can't just go, we're going to do it once and we're going to just stop. So my recommendation is setting those forums up, having that dialogue, always having that dialogue. So it's really about, what are the policies, processes that you are going to have? Have you defined them? Have you set them up? Have you got a process for engagement with the local authority? How can you develop that relationship with the community? I think that the comment there that a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth has put its shoes on is quite relevant, because in the current days of social media, all sorts of things get put out. And if you don't have a process and a policy for being able to counter, to engage with that and deal with it, then you are losing the battle on what is the truth. So you've got to have those processes in place. You've got to have those people in place to be able to counter what will be spurious arguments or downright lies in a lot of cases. And so therefore, without that in place and without that ongoing early dialogue, you are always going to be seen as the people that are wrong, bad, and not respecting what the community wants. Next. So the next part of this is about producing standards. So often get involved with producing what they call a code of construction practice. And the code of construction practice, and there are some examples there, often produced on large projects. These ones, High Speed and Luton, are all in the public domain. Helped to produce some of those in the past, where you are starting to set out what it is what your policies are, what your standards are, and how you're going to you're going to measure and work within those standards. What is the minimum standard that you're prepared to accept? What are you going to do to monitor things? What are you going to do to have complaints? How are you going to engage with these things? So codes of construction practices are very good documents, and they generally cover, I've listed out there a number of headings. They generally cover those topic areas, and each one of those topic areas can be expanded so that you end up with, how do I manage something? What is it that I want to manage? There are no hard and fast rules on any of these. Some you might not have cultural heritage issues, so therefore you don't need to necessarily include those. You might have more landscaping and visual elements that need more expansion. So again, it all varies on the project that you've got. What are the specifics to your location? But it's quite a good checklist on the topics that you want to be able to deal with. So if we go to the next slide, so the other document that is quite good to have in place is an environmental management system. Does it comply with BS 14001? So an environmental management system predominantly deals with how you're going to manage the environmental aspects of the construction. What it talks about, what sort of competency, what sort of training, what sort of requirements, what are the standards that you need, what are the processes that you're going to have in place for managing those environmental impacts. How are you going to audit them? How are you going to record them? How are you going to put in measures to actually address the issues? So the British standards is a good one to go back to again see what the standards are, what is required, what do you need in place. So building the framework we've got here. These are the sorts of specific things that you probably want to be thinking about under each of these headings. So what are your working hours? What are have you defined what the core working hours are? Have you considered what the startup period in the morning is? So you might work from 8 till 6, but is there a startup period? Do machines need to be started up and moving and working at 7:30? If the machines are finishing work at 6 o'clock, what about moving them back to the yard and storing them? So often there's a startup period, there's a close down period. They sit outside of the core working hours. How do you define additional working periods, i.e. periods outside of that at weekends or at nights? What are the tasks that need to be done? When do they need to be done? How long will they need to be done for? How many nights? So that you understand that these things will impact residents or impact businesses. Have you defined the construction site? So what is the construction site? What is the area that you're actually taking? What is the area that you are working in? Have you defined the boundary areas? And then you go on to things like, well, what are the levels of housekeeping? What cleanliness you need to have in place? Pest control. Waste will attract vermin. And it doesn't necessarily mean rats. It could be birds, it could be pigeons, it could be other things. And then there's the discharges from the housekeeping. So washing down areas, if you're washing down things, it may have pollutants in it, and is that going into the local watercourse or sewers? Lighting, because during the winter months, sites, compounds will need to be lit. Is that a disturbance? Are the lights shining in residence? Noise alarms, security alarms, if they're going off outside of working hours, how do you deal with them? Where's the location of your accommodation? Is it next to businesses, residential areas? Is it something that is going to cause a nuisance? The other one is smoking. Defined areas for people to smoke in. Are they set in areas that could cause a nuisance? If you have 10 people congregating together smoking, that can cause a nuisance to residents. And then there's the general access. How are people getting to and from and on and off the site? Where are your gates? Where are they going to be located? Where are your controls for getting people on and off site? And then there's a general worker code of conduct. So what behaviours are you expecting from your workers? What are you expecting them to do? So in certain jobs I've worked on where we've been working in and amongst passengers, for example, what's the minimum code of clothing that you're expecting to wear? What's the behaviour that you're expecting people to conform to? The other one is, work sites, perimeters, hoardings, gates, all of those things. What sort of hoarding do you want? What is the type of hoarding that you need? Where is it located? Where, is it to be lit? Is it not to be lit? Are you painting it? How are you painting it? How is it to be maintained? Lighting on the hoardings, sight lines, all of those things need to be considered. And then there's the general security, CCTV, what are the security protocols? Who do they contact if there's a problem? What is the response from the security? Next one. Then you've got accidents. Again, it's the emergency preparedness. What are you expecting people to do? Who takes responsibility for something? Is it the contractor? Have you got a designated person? What are the processes and procedures? And that emergency response these days needs to cover all sorts of things. So it could be flooding, it could be an incident, it could be fire, it could be theft. How do you deal with those? And if this is a high profile area or a high profile job, how do you deal with a major accident? In cases in central London, there have been cranes that have fallen over. There have been cars driving into things. So again, it's how do you deal with that? Who is responsible? What is the processes and procedures that you have got written down, and who has got access to them? Because you want to be able to have access to them. Pollution, the processes for dealing with pollution. Again, it's what are you doing with them? Have you got a spill kit? Do you understand what might the pollution be? What is it? And then how do you deal with all of that? So pollution can involve all sorts of things. It could be a chemical, it could be fuel, it could be silt, it could be water, it could be anything. It could be asbestos, it could be airborne, it could be something that is washed onto the ground. If your site also encompasses agricultural land, how are you going to manage that agricultural land? Because you can't just leave it derelict. You can't just leave it unmanaged. So it's management of that land, and it's also the monitoring of that land as well. So if you leave it and it's not monitored, you may end up with things like fly tipping, or you may end up with things that are happening on the land that you don't want, travellers or something like that. So again, it's just managing those areas. Air quality, It's the production of an air quality plan. What are you doing to manage the air quality? What's the management of equipment plant? What are the minimum standards you want from construction plant? Do they all have to comply with certain air quality standards? Where are you how are you going to monitor the air quality? What monitoring stations are you going to have? Where are you going to have? Who's going to monitor them? What are the control levels, so that you actually have to implement some sort of remediation when you hit certain targets? How do you control dust? Are you watering down? Are you covering things over? How do you monitor the debris that gets produced? Odor is again another one that is often overlooked. So when you start digging things out in the ground, is the ground contaminated? Is there material that is rotting? Is there material that's going to cause an odor to local residents? So biodiversity, again, it's another complex area. Have you got in place an ecological management plan in which how you're going to monitor and control and protect biodiversity? Do you understand what you have got as in terms of species in the construction area? How are you going to control and manage invasive species? Japanese knotweed. If you come across that, there is a whole host of protocols that you need to go through to be able to dig it out, and it becomes a waste, and it becomes a contaminated waste, and you have to send it off to, licensed tips. So, and are you monitoring? What are you doing to monitor to ensure that the material that is going off-site is going to where it's supposed to be sent to? Because sometimes it doesn't. Often, a new one that's coming in is climate change. So you want to monitor the reduction in carbon emissions, or understand carbon emissions. But the thing that is coming through in a lot of construction sites is this extreme weather. Heat. How are you dealing with extreme heat? Periods of high temperatures, what are you doing with that? Does that cause problems with construction? Does that cause problem with the construction operations? And then on the other side of the scale is flooding, flash flooding. How are you going to deal with the water? Where's the water going? If you've dug out sewers and you haven't got temporary control measures in place, are you likely to suffer from flooding? Next. Other things to consider: occupational health. Is this something that you want to start promoting? Is the promotion of healthy living? Is this something that, as a local authority, you would look to promote? The landscape, as the construction changes, there will be visual impacts on the existing landscape and the existing character. How are you managing the existing trees? Trees are always one that gets people. You have existing trees. Vehicles driving too close to them will damage the roots. That will damage the trees. What protection measures are you putting in place? What you don't want to do is end up with, a visual environment which is degraded by construction, traffic. Grass has been turned up. People are parking in areas that they shouldn't be parking in. The ground gets turned over. There is a lot of environmental damage going on. Noise and vibration we've touched on, but you've got the Control of Pollution Act 1974, you've got the Environmental Pollution Act. It's about developing the noise and vibration management plans in place. Understanding what are the tasks that may cause excessive noise or vibration. Normally it will be cutting, drilling, but piling can cause vibration. And if that is being carried out outside of existing working hours or for long periods, that will impact local residents. Uh, people work different times. Not excessive noise is one of the biggest complaints. Then it's monitoring. What are the thresholds? What are the levels? How are you monitoring that noise and vibration? Next, so soils, geology, um, excavation, earthworks. What are you doing to manage holes that are being dug in the ground? What are you doing to recover excavated material? Is all of that material just going off site? Is that material contaminated? As material gets excavated, it dries out, you get dust. Is there a problem with um, ground gas leaking out? Is there problems with leachates and pollution that's already in the ground that you've now disturbed? One of the big problems we often get is silt. So excavations take place, ground gets dug up, it rains, silt gets washed down into public sewers and drains, causes them to back up. How are you managing the silt? How are you managing, and that adds to flooding, and how are you managing that flood risk? Traffic and transport, development of a construction traffic management plan. So that specifically counters, what am I doing to manage that construction traffic? Have I defined construction access routes for vehicles? What are the estimated volumes of construction traffic? What are the times that traffic may be coming to and from site? What are the impacts on that on local residents? If traffic is coming in at certain times, in the morning when you've got school runs or you've got commuting, is that going to cause problems? Because that causes congestion. If you then set up diversions, what are those diversion routes? Are they adequate? Are they suitable? You're going to have the same problem with the construction workers because they will want to get to work. So where are they coming from? How are they getting to and from work? Where are they parking? Because parking it will always be a problem. And you need to make adequate provision for that. And if you don't have suitable public transport or infrastructure, people will drive to work and they will park anywhere. Waste and resources. So management of the waste. What are you doing to identify the waste? How is waste being identified? What are the processes for storing that waste on site? How are you recycling it? How are you monitoring its recycling? Are you looking to reduce the amount of natural resources that are being used? Are you keen on recycling that material that's being generated? So if you've got a demolition, are you reusing the concrete? If you are, there are what are the processes for that? The process for crushing and grading all of that is noisy, it is also dirty, and it is dusty. And is it what you really want to do? And then the last one, I believe this is the last one, in building the framework, is just general water management. So if you have existing water courses, how are you monitoring the impact of construction on those water courses? Are are they getting polluted? What is the control of that? How are you monitoring groundwater? So on a lot of cases, I've worked in areas of chalk where you suddenly going into local aquifers, or there is the potential to pollute local aquifers. So you need to understand what the impacts of those are likely to be. Next. So this is the last bit, I believe, which is the reality of delivery. And the reality of delivery is just some of the observations. Construction is a disruptive process. it will always be a disruptive process. And if you ask anybody if they want that disruptive process, they will always say no. So you need to manage that, but you need to understand what some of the key problems are. And water pollution we've touched on, chemical spillages, often where people refuel vehicles on site, chemicals, fuel, etc. will get spilt. Excessive noise, causing stress, will cause stress to local residents, disrupt sleep patterns. Nothing worse than angry residents because their sleep is being disrupted. What sort of plant and equipment are you having on site? If you're not specifying those things, what is the contractor going to do? What is he going to use? What are you going to do about the volume of construction traffic? Illegal parking is a big problem, and it's just the increased congestion. And it's the improper disposal of waste. Those are the things that I've often come across in terms of having major impact on local businesses and residents, because they can't get around with their day-to-day life, because there's cars parked, or there's lots of traffic, or people have been dumping things. And it might not necessarily be the construction job that is doing it. It's just opportunists that are going, well, this isn't being watched or monitored, and therefore we'll fly tip here.